rolling.
Welcome to the REI Rookies Podcast, the Real Estate Investing Rookies Podcast, episode number 91, where we invite you to follow us on our journey towards financial freedom using the power of real estate. I'm Jack Haas.
I'm Josh Cove.
Here at REI Rookies, we believe in a couple key principles. Number one, the best way to retain information is by teaching it to others. And number two, a rising tide lifts all boats. We're not competitors, we're a community. So let's get into some real estate investing. This week, our friend Anita Hirth joins me on the show to chat about her experience being an Airbnb superhost in Colorado and a few things you should know before getting into the Airbnb business. We also talk about her experience using a tiny house as an Airbnb rental. So here's the show. So we have Anita Hirth on the call here today, and Anita has a very unique business model compared to what we typically have on the show. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to have a conversation. And Anita is a part of really a mastermind group that we joined not too long ago. And we've been chatting and meeting, and I've been seeing some of your success on Facebook. It's been great to follow along. So Anita, thanks for joining us. And I thought we would start things off by you just doing a quick introduction and talk about your market a little bit.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jack. So just a little introduction about me. I've been doing real estate for a little over 3 years, and I've been doing it full time for, about a year and a half now. My market is Colorado mountain towns, basically. So my sort of niche is resort towns in the Colorado Rockies and like ski resort towns and their surrounding bedroom communities. They're really great markets because there's year-round demand, there's big housing shortages, and you can't really build these towns out, so the housing shortages kind of aren't going anywhere. So a lot of the towns surrounding the resort towns, have become just fantastic rental communities as well. And I live here in beautiful Colorado myself. So that's what I've been doing. That's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, so one of the things that really gets the attention, and you and I chatted briefly before the show began, but there's a lot of interest in Airbnb. So how many of those units do you currently have right now? I
currently have 6 Airbnb units.
Sure, and so you really tailor to those seasonal type of visitors?
Yes, and what's nice about these towns here now is with the incredible growth of Denver, Denver and Colorado Springs. Denver and Colorado Springs are 2 of the fastest growing cities in the country for many years now. And what that's meant for these mountain towns is that there's really no downtime. I have these units filled year round, and the prices vary a great deal. The prices are by far the highest in ski season. And then they're high in the summer too, because people love coming to the mountains in the summer. But even in what used to be called the mud seasons, spring and fall, you still get locals coming up to hike, take advantage of the low rates and everything. So they're really fantastic. They're really fantastic markets for short-term rental.
So what's kind of neat is that I've run into other people in the Colorado, Denver type markets, and they've been really almost having to do a lot of their real estate investing out of state because of the cost. Are you finding that not to be as much of a hurdle when you're dealing with the Airbnb stuff?
Well, right now, I've purchased a few things this year, but I'm looking in kind of really off the radar markets now. My primary Airbnb market, Summit County, which is Breckenridge in that area. I'm not buying anything now because it's very expensive. And when I started investing 3 years ago, Denver was already not attractive for me because of the prices, but Summit County still was. So yes, it's definitely a very expensive market. However, there are some very off the radar towns still in Colorado with a lot of rental demand that don't have tons of investors.
Sure. It almost sounds a little bit about like what we're experiencing, because Fargo isn't a huge community, but some of the prices are starting to creep up where, it's becoming more of a challenge to hit that 1% rule. But we're seeing smaller towns on the outskirts that are in the path of progress or what have you, that we still can hit some of those price points and find those deals.
Exactly. And that's where I'm looking now. That's where I'm sending my letters. I did a few flips this year in Summit County in those high dollar markets, but I'm not looking for holds there right now. I'm going to wait till that market turns.
Sure. So when it comes to the Airbnb stuff, like what have been some, you've been doing this for a little while now. What have you found as like some of your bigger challenges and some things that might have even surprised you?
So a few really important things I've learned on Airbnb. So unless you're going to manage it entirely yourself, which I did at the beginning, and that's very time consuming, very soon you're going to have to find an amazing team, and your business is really going to be as good as your team. Now, if you're lucky, you can find a fantastic full service management company. They're very expensive. In my market, they charge kind of 30 to 40%. In management fees. And I did try one company and it really didn't work out well. It was a terrible experience. There was no sort of personal touch. But most importantly, they didn't know how to price my market as well as I did. They didn't understand how deeply we had to discount mud season. So I cut ties with them. And then right now I'm extremely lucky because I have a really great situation where I have a team on the ground. They do all my cleaning and they do all my guest interaction. But then I still handle all the pricing and the financials and kind of all the stuff online. And that's worked out really well for me. It's given me the right level of control and it's affordable for me, because their commissions, because of the scope of what they're doing, are lower than if it were a full service company. And I have, it's such a personal relationship and they take such great personal care of my properties. So again, number one is you really have to think about who your team is going to be. If you want to jump into this, do you want to do it all yourself? That's okay if you do, but it is much more time consuming than even if you're managing a long-term rental yourself. And if you're not, really make sure you have a great team in place, whether that's a full service management company or it's some sort of hybrid like what I'm doing.
Sure.
So that's...
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that's sort of number one if you want to jump into this. In terms of sort of negatives and risks, I would say by far there's two. One, which is not as bad, is that you're really at risk for increasing competition. So for example, in 2018, even though I had more established rentals than in 2017, my stuff was pretty new in 2017, whereas in 2018, they were already like 5-star reviewed properties with lots and lots of reviews and stays. I made less money than in 2017. And the reason for that is just increasing competition. I had to keep my prices lower because more and more units are entering the market. So that's something that you don't really expect in a booming market. You expect rents to be going up, but with short-term rentals, and I hear this from, I'm in a bunch of like Facebook groups for Airbnb hosts, and I hear the same thing from a lot of people that they're making less money this year than last year because of competition. So that's one risk you take. In general, it's much, much harder to model how much money you're going to be making. You really don't know until you get into it, unless you're in, I don't know, maybe if you're in a huge, super established market where the management companies can really tell you, look, we have 50 units just like yours, and this is how much money they make. But for my market, I'm sorry.
No problem.
My market, I just don't know until I get into it. But the other really big risk with short-term rentals is the regulatory risk. There's a lot of towns and cities all over the country that have pretty much completely shut it down. Big cities like Denver and New York City don't allow you to have an Airbnb unless you live in it. So you can only rent out a room in your own home. Mm-hmm. So that effectively shuts down the market. And then a lot of small towns have done some really crazy things as well. For example, Durango, Colorado has restrictions where you can only have one per block. So you get the license and then that's it. No one else on your block can have the license. And in my market too, they're coming up with some ridiculous new regulations that are going to push a lot of people that are trying to do it themselves out of the market. They're putting in a lot of requirements that really force you to have either a full service management company or a team right there on the ground. So this is a really big risk, really, really big risk. And if your town hasn't kind of gone, or your municipality hasn't really slogged through the whole debate with this already, then I would be very wary, because they're going to do it at some point when it picks up, and you really don't know what they're going to come up with. And again, they've come up with all sorts of crazy stuff, from very high taxes to extremely strict regulations to things like Durango, where if someone else on your block already has the license, well, too bad.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. And I guess I never even thought of how aggressive some of these communities can get.
It's huge. And I mean, obviously, especially in the big cities, there's a ton of money behind this, from the hotel industry. I mean, this has been, I think, pretty devastating to the hotel industry. And so in these large cities, they lobby and they've won. At least, I mean, I know New York City and Denver are like that. I'm sure there's a lot of other cities in the country with those same regulations. There are different, I think, forces at play in the smaller places, but it's such a new industry. The government's getting very heavily involved in regulating it, and we don't really know what's going to happen down the line. Colorado, there was one proposal right now that they start taxing residential properties that are short-term rentals as though they were commercial properties. And commercial properties have a 4 times higher tax rate here than residential. So can you imagine if all of a sudden, I mean, it could happen. You never know. You don't have any control over this. It goes through the government. My taxes could go up 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So it's a big risk, you take in these short-term rentals. And for me, I always want to make sure that if they come in and enact some absurd regulations, I'm still going to be fine. I can just switch it to a long-term rental, and I'll at least cover my costs, or, hopefully have some decent cash flow.
Sure. So is that your whole acquisition thought, is that you purchase it as if it's a rental, just to be on the safe side? I'm sure your numbers are going to be a lot lower if you just have that type of mindset.
Well, yes. And that was my mindset before. And this year I kind of broke it, and I got a property where if I do have to turn it into a short-term rental, it's probably going to be more of a break even. But at the very least, I wouldn't buy anything where I'm going to be in the red.
Sure.
If I have to turn it into a long-term rental, for sure. Yeah.
And like we've always said too, is, time heals all wounds when it comes to that type of purchase too. I mean, eventually it'll eventually cash flow, right?
Yeah, but you don't want to be. I wouldn't want to be in the red for 10 years. You never know.
Yeah.
I mean, and
10
everyone
years would be long. Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone has a different risk tolerance, and they have different market knowledge. But that's how I do it for me, because my risk tolerance is not very high. I don't like high risk investments.
Sure. So one of the things that I found especially interesting is that you have at least one of your units is a tiny house, right? Yes,
that's correct. I do have a tiny house.
So that's near where you live, or it's so pretty...
It's wild. This one's wild. So I actually bought this tiny house to be the guest house at my house, okay, like in my backyard.
Right.
And then I ran into some issues with my HOA. I was going to have it as my guest house and rent it on Airbnb, but then I'm in an HOA. I ran into some issues. I didn't want to get into bad terms with the HOA or fight them. And I had a plan B. I own a couple of lots in an RV park a half hour from Breckenridge. And I said, well, okay, let me stick it up there and see what happens. Now, it's not an investment I would have done otherwise because of the risk. I said, I really just have absolutely no idea how this thing is going to perform on Airbnb. But it's been a month and a half and it's doing really well. I'm fully booked.
Yeah. That's one of those things that is always struck me as interesting, these tiny houses. So where did you find this tiny house? Was it already in the market? You just bought a used one, or did you buy it new?
I bought it brand new, and I bought it from one of the largest manufacturers in the country. They're called Tumbleweed Homes, and they're in Colorado Springs. And I've actually kind of been into tiny houses for a while. There's a big convention every year. I think it's in Dallas the last couple of years, called the Tiny House Jamboree. It used to be in Colorado Springs, and I went the last year it was in Colorado Springs. So I got to see all these tiny house manufacturers from all over the country. And the place was swarmed. People are so into this. There are all sorts of people there. It was really fun. People are doing really cool and innovative things. But I was really impressed by this company, Tumbleweed. They're a really big operation. They have a big factory in Colorado Springs. I've been there a few times. And they crank out these really high-quality tiny homes. So I got one out of inventory there.
So are you thinking about maybe doing more of these? I mean, it seems to be a very cost-effective way.
So one of the extremely attractive things about tiny homes is that you can get a tax if you're a real estate professional, and you get one of these to use as an Airbnb or a long-term rental, then you can take a tax deduction for the whole thing. So that's huge. That's a really huge advantage of them. For that reason, I do want to get more. However, because it's interesting, the tiny home, like people love them on Airbnb. It's such a fun place to stay. But living in one full time, it's pretty tough. You've got to be a certain kind of person, and people do it. But so I don't know if I could break even if I have to turn it into a long-term rental. So, will I get another one? I want to wait through the winter and see how it does. And then I really have to look at the numbers and think about what kind of risk I'm willing to take on it.
Sure. So does it hook up like a trailer house, or how does that type of thing work out?
It hooks up like an RV. So the tumbleweed houses it's called RVIA certified. So they're technically RVs. They're, RVs like any other RVs. They're certified just like RVs. They're built to those standards. So they have standard RV hookups.
Okay. So it's pretty straightforward.
It's straightforward, but mine's up at 10,000 feet in the mountains, and it was a big learning curve for us. We had a lot of freezing. We had a Sunday very expensive plumber call to deal with freezing. That took us some time to figure out how to insulate it properly. But if you're in that kind of, I don't have to tell you, you're in North Dakota. If you're in North Dakota or at 10,000 feet in Colorado, you have to take a lot of precautions and work with some professionals to make sure things don't freeze because, it's an RV at the end of the day.
Yeah. Okay. That's really an interesting thing. And I can see how, especially in Airbnb, how attractive something like that could be because, like you said, there is a tiny house movement right now. And I would also like to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. It's
so much fun to visit because all of the drawbacks of living there you don't care about when you're visiting. You don't have much stuff, right? You have like a bag, coat, and they're so lovely. They're so much fun, and people love them. We're getting a really wonderful response.
Oh, that's awesome. So going back to the Airbnb thing. You said you got a lot of team members now associated with your Airbnb, and I understand that. One of the big time sucks associated with them is the communication with the tenant or the people who want to rent these places. Would you say that's one of the more complicated pieces of it, or?
I wouldn't say it's a huge time suck. I was just talking about this with a friend of mine who's considering doing it. He's like, well, what do I do? I don't want to get calls in the middle of the night for plumbing issues. I said, I've never gotten a call in the middle of the night. People are reasonable, but you do have to communicate, and some guests, require more communication than others. It's not as true on other platforms like VRBO. My market in Colorado is an Airbnb and VRBO market, and the VRBO guests don't expect as much communication. They kind of treat it more like a hotel, but a lot of the Airbnb guests do, and they ask for recommendations and stuff like that. So again, I've totally offloaded all my communication onto my manager. And he's fantastic, and they're local, they're right there. So they actually know all the local recommendations and stuff like that. But yeah, especially once you rack them up, like when I just had one, it didn't bother me at all, the communication. But once I was up to like 3, it was taking up too much of my time, and I wasn't being timely enough in my responses.
Sure.
So it's definitely something, for sure. That's a big difference between that and long-term rentals.
So like, what are some of the common amenities that you've found have really helped you stand out? Because I understand that as these Airbnb places become more popular in area, it becomes a little harder to become one of those super hosts, that type of thing. What have you done, or what have you found that kind of helps attract those people? And like, for example, in our area, it seems like Mark is having more and more success as he's putting in more area specific things, like we're NDSU bison around here. So he's putting in a lot of custom paintings and bison type stuff. So it's becoming kind of more of a niche type of Airbnb. So what are you finding?
In my experience, at least, and again, I'm talking Airbnb. I think the other platforms work a bit differently. I'm on VRBO as well, but almost like 95% of my bookings are Airbnb. On Airbnb, it's all about your pictures and your reviews. I mean, I don't think people even read the description a lot of the time. You have to have professional pictures and really high quality, great professional pictures. I pay a lot for my pictures. I have an amazing photographer, and it's worth every penny many times over. And your reviews. I mean, people at the end of the day, they're reading the reviews and they're looking at the pictures. They're not really looking at anything else. The way for me to get the good reviews is, I mean, you have to be super clean. You have to have nice, everything has to be, the beds have to be comfortable. You have to have nice sheets, you have to be super clean. You really, really need to be clean. But then in my experience, what really makes you stand out is the communication, is the personal touch. So for example, when I was getting overwhelmed before I brought my manager on board, I had lost Superhost at that point just because my communication wasn't that great. I wasn't getting back to people as fast as I should have. I wasn't giving them, really friendly and thorough responses like I should. Once my manager took over, all the reviews were about how amazing, the people that they dealt with were. I mean, they loved the place, but then half the reviews were, Alex was so great. Haley was so great. They're my managers. And that's what, like half my reviews mention how wonderful they are. And I think that's what makes us really stand out. So again, one of the amazing things about short-term rentals versus renting from a hotel, and really specifically Airbnb versus going through like booking.com or one of those more hotel-like platforms, is that personal touch that you can call someone up and say, hey, where can I go to lunch? Where can I go to dinner? Where can I take a hike? Where can I take my kids? And, I think it just adds so much to the experience for people, especially because I'm in a resort market and everyone's there on vacation.
Sure. So do you have some of those type of recommendations printed out and ready for them in their Airbnb, or is that something that you just are fielding those type of questions as they're coming in?
I did in one of mine. I had this house on Airbnb and then I sold it because actually the large house came with a ton of problems. The little condos didn't. And I had like a guidebook there where I mentioned all my favorite restaurants and stuff. And I don't know, I never got any feedback on it. So I didn't do it again in my other ones. I just wait till they ask now. And then, my managers reply.
Sure. So in a nutshell, you're basically saying that you got to buy it right. And hopefully you can find somebody on the ground that is good at communication, especially with your guests. And is there, we're having a problem here in town with finding people at the right price point in turning over for cleaning and that type of thing. So do you find that there's a magic price point or anything there to help you find those type of people?
It's pretty, because we have so much short-term rental in our market. It's, there's a lot of people and the prices are pretty standard for getting a professional. Like you can just, like if you want a company and that it's, again, with short-term rentals, you got to know that no matter what happens, that turnover is going to happen, especially because, over half of my turnovers are same day. I have someone checking out and checking in. So, you can pay less and get like one person, but then when she gets sick, you're going to be running over there, turning it over. Or you can pay for a professional company and then, that it's going to get done and it's going to get done to a certain standard. And, in my market, those rates are very standard. There's a pretty standard rate for a 1-bedroom, a pretty standard rate for a 2-bedroom condo, et cetera.
Sure. Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess it's probably so new in our market that it's not a very standard thing quite yet.
For sure. And again, every market is different. Look, what I'm telling you about how much people love the personal touch, I'm in a resort market, right? So it's all vacationers. If you're in a market where you've got primarily business travelers, they may be looking for something totally different.
Sure. Okay. Well, with that being said, is there any other things that anything that I didn't ask you that comes to mind that people probably should be aware of?
Well, sure. Yeah. One of the major benefits of having a short-term rental versus a long-term rental, which I didn't realize until I was a couple of years into it, is, there's two. Number one, your property stays in much better condition. Your property is always spotless. It can only get so dirty, right? People are usually there for a few days. You're getting it cleaned. You've got eyes on it every few days. There's no deferred maintenance. Your property is always looking perfect. And if you want to, and so now if you want to sell, number one, it's always sell ready. You don't have to go, spend a lot of money just to get it looking decent, because it's always looking decent. The property's constantly taken care of. And two, and I found this year because I've sold some properties this year because my market's topping out. If I have a long-term rental, I can only sell around the time that lease is turning over. If my lease is turning over in October, it's going to be very hard for me to sell that property in February, because there's a lot of people that don't want to buy a property and then wait until October until it's actually vacant, right? Mm-hmm. So like I had properties I want to sell, and I was totally tied to that 12-month schedule. I knew that I couldn't sell. And then also showings are an issue, right? So if I'm trying to sell it with tenants in there, now I have to deal with the tenants and allowing showings. Like, this was a big nightmare. I had a bunch of properties that I had a lot of problems with. Whereas if you have a short-term rental and I want to sell, boom, I just, I can sell at any time of the year. I just close off my calendar, right? List it and start showings. That gives tremendous flexibility. And again, if you're someone, comparing it to long-term rentals, if you think of the liquidity of your property is much more liquid as a short-term rental than as a long-term rental because of those long-term tenants.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate your time, and that's very insightful. Thank you again for your time today. And it's always great to talk to somebody who's in the trenches doing this type of thing, because, everything else is, we're doing a lot of speculation here regarding Airbnb, and it's really insightful. So thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, it was very much so. And if people wanted to reach out or follow you or get a hold of you, how would they do that?
That's a good question. I don't have like a social media presence. They're welcome to email me. My email is skyhighhomescolorado, and that's all spelled out, so it's long. skyhighhomescolorado@gmail.com. Anyone's welcome to email me.
Okay, well, great. I appreciate your time again, and we'll probably see you at another mastermind in the near future. For
sure. I look forward to it.
Thanks to Anita Hirth for joining me on the show. And if you'd like to find her, head over to summitskipad.com for more information on her rentals. We've put a lot of effort into the show, and if you found some value, please support us through Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/REI Rookies. If you have any thoughts or suggestions, shoot us an email at info@reirookies.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at REI Rookies. And if you like what you're hearing, please like, subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. It really helps other people find the show. Remember, get off the bench and into the game. We'll see you next time.
I don't like to tell a man what to do with his money, but if you ain't investing in property, then you're dumber than a dummy.
I'm not dumb. I'm smart.
Well, buy property. That's my advice.